Go ahead and order another bottle, my daughter-in-law said loudly as she lifted her champagne glass toward the waiter. My mother-in-law is paying tonight. She won't even notice. Everyone at the table laughed except me. I sat there quietly beneath the warm amber lights of Bellamy's steakhouse, listening to crystal glasses clink while my son avoided looking directly at me. The restaurant overlooked the Chicago River, its tall windows reflecting the city lights like fractured pieces of gold across the dark water below. It should have been a beautiful evening. Instead, it felt like sitting inside a carefully staged performance where everyone knew their lines except me. Vanessa Whitmore loved expensive places. Expensive wine. Expensive handbags. Expensive smiles that disappeared the moment waiters turned away. Tonight she wore a cream-colored designer dress with gold jewelry that caught the light every time she moved her hand dramatically across the table. She looked radiant, confident, completely at ease, spending money that wasn't hers. "Mom, you should try the oysters," my son Daniel finally said without meeting my eyes. "They flew them in fresh this morning." I glanced at the towering seafood display in the center of the table. Lobster tails, king crab, oysters layered over crushed ice. 2 bottles of imported champagne already half empty. There were 6 people at dinner tonight, but somehow the bill already looked larger than what I used to spend on groceries in 2 months after Harold passed away. Vanessa smiled sweetly at me. "Daniel said you've barely gone out since your husband died. We thought it would be good for you to celebrate a little." Celebrate. The word sat strangely in my chest. My husband had been gone only 8 months. Some mornings I still woke up expecting to hear his slippers against the hardwood hallway upstairs. Some nights I still reached across the bed before remembering half of it was empty now. But apparently grief had become inconvenient for everyone else. I folded my napkin carefully across my lap and looked around the restaurant. Couples laughed softly over candlelight. A pianist near the bar played old jazz standards that Harold used to hum while shaving in the morning. The scent of butter, garlic, and expensive whiskey floated through the air. Everything looked elegant, comfortable, civilized. But underneath the polished silverware and soft music, something felt wrong tonight. Vanessa had insisted on organizing this dinner herself. She'd called me 3 times this week reminding me to dress nicely. "It's family only," she'd said cheerfully. "No stress. No drama, just us appreciating each other." Yet from the moment I arrived, the evening felt less like appreciation and more like a transaction already completed behind closed doors. Daniel barely spoke unless Vanessa prompted him. My granddaughter Lily sat quietly beside me, scrolling her phone beneath the tablecloth, clearly uncomfortable every time her mother made another joke about money. And Vanessa herself seemed unusually energized, almost triumphant, like someone hosting a celebration before a secret victory announcement. "Another bottle?" the waiter asked politely as Vanessa lifted the champagne menu again. "Absolutely," she answered before anyone else could speak. "And bring the reserve this time." She looked directly at me when she said it. "Life's short, right, Eleanor?" I smiled faintly. Sometimes shorter than people expect. Something flickered across her face for less than a second before she laughed again. "See? That's the spirit." The waiter disappeared toward the bar while Daniel loosened his tie and leaned back comfortably in his chair. "Honestly, Mom, you deserve nights like this. Dad worked hard so you could enjoy yourself." There it was again, that strange emphasis on my money, my accounts, my comfort. Ever since Harold died, conversations around me had quietly shifted. At first it was small things. Vanessa offering to organize my paperwork. Daniel insisting on helping with online banking because technology gets confusing. Then came discussions about estate planning, long-term care, simplifying finances, protecting assets. They always framed it as concern, love, family responsibility. But lately I'd started noticing details that bothered me. Missing bank statements, password reset emails I never requested, purchases on one of my credit cards from stores I'd never visited. And every single time I brought something up, Vanessa smiled patiently and said the same thing. "You probably forgot. At 68, widowhood already made people look at you differently." They spoke slower, explained things twice, tilted their heads with sympathy while quietly deciding your mind had become fragile along with your body. Vanessa had mastered that tone perfectly. Soft, patient, slightly amused. As if my confusion itself proved she should be trusted more than I trusted myself. The waiter returned carrying another chilled bottle wrapped in a white towel. Vanessa clapped her hands together dramatically. Now this is how family should eat. She raised her glass toward Daniel. To new beginnings. Daniel hesitated before touching his glass to hers. Lily looked down. I noticed that immediately. The child couldn't hide discomfort yet. Not the way adults could. To family, Daniel repeated quietly. I lifted my water glass instead of champagne. To honesty, I said softly. Vanessa's smile tightened almost invisibly. The waiter began pouring champagne into crystal flutes while Vanessa pulled out my black credit card from her purse without asking me first. She placed it casually on the silver tray beside the check presenter like it already belonged there. Like I belonged there too. Just an aging woman financing everyone else's lifestyle while they waited for me to become confused enough to surrender the rest. You know, Vanessa said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Daniel keeps telling me we should travel more while Eleanor's still willing to spoil the family. A few people laughed politely. My son laughed too, though it sounded forced. I stared at the card resting beside the champagne bottle. The same card Harold and I once used for anniversary trips to Maine. The same card Vanessa had started borrowing just for emergencies 3 years ago. Funny how emergencies had slowly turned into handbags, spa weekends, luxury dinners, and first-class airline upgrades. The waiter picked up the card with professional politeness and disappeared again. Vanessa leaned back confidently. I swear, Eleanor, you always look so calm. Nothing rattles you. I folded my hands together on the table. That's because I stopped reacting before people expect me to. For a brief moment, silence settled over the table. Even the pianist seemed farther away somehow. Then Vanessa laughed again, louder this time. Well, tonight you don't have to worry about anything. We're taking care of you now. Taking care of me. The phrase echoed coldly in my mind. Because earlier that morning, 3 hours before this dinner began, I had walked into First National Bank wearing Harold's old wool coat and carrying a folder thick with printed statements. By noon, every shared account connected to Daniel or Vanessa had been frozen. Every authorized user removed. Every transfer request suspended pending investigation. And by 3 o'clock, my attorney Margaret Hayes had officially filed paperwork reversing every financial authorization signed after Harold's funeral. Vanessa still didn't know any of that. Neither did Daniel. They were still laughing when the waiter finally returned to the table. But this time, he wasn't smiling. He stood beside Vanessa holding the black card carefully between 2 fingers. I apologize, ma'am, he said gently, his eyes shifting toward me instead of her. But every account attached to this card has been frozen. The laughter disappeared so quickly, it almost felt unreal. Vanessa blinked twice at the waiter as though she had not heard him correctly. Then she forced a smile that looked painfully stiff around the edges. There must be some mistake, she said lightly, reaching for the card again. Try it one more time. The waiter nodded politely. I could tell he was uncomfortable now. People at nearby tables had already begun glancing in our direction, sensing the tension spreading across ours like cold smoke. He disappeared again toward the payment station while Vanessa turned sharply toward Daniel. Did you move money out of the account? She whispered, though not quietly enough. Daniel frowned. No. Why would I do that? Lily slowly lowered her phone onto the table. Her young eyes moved from her parents to me carefully, almost cautiously. I noticed something else too. She did not look surprised. She looked nervous. Vanessa leaned closer to Daniel. Call the bank. Right now? Yes, right now. Daniel finally looked at me directly for the first time all evening. Mom, did something happen with your account? His voice carried that same careful tone people use with elderly relatives when they are afraid of embarrassing them in public. I folded my hands calmly beside my water glass. Several things happened with my accounts. Vanessa let out a short laugh that sounded brittle. Eleanor, if this is about fraud protection, we can fix it tomorrow. The restaurant just needs another card. I tilted my head slightly. I know. The waiter returned again. This time his expression was more serious. I am sorry, ma'am. The bank declined all linked accounts connected to this card. The word linked hung heavily over the table. Vanessa's face lost color beneath her makeup. Daniel sat frozen beside her. Lily stared at me silently. I reached for my handbag slowly and removed a different card. A plain silver card none of them had seen before. I handed it to the waiter. This one will work. He nodded gratefully and walked away again. Vanessa watched me carefully now, her confident performance finally cracking. What is going on? She asked quietly. Outside the restaurant windows, snow had started falling lightly over the river. Small white flakes drifted beneath the streetlights while traffic moved slowly across the bridge nearby. Chicago always looked beautiful during the first snowfall of winter. Harold used to love nights like this. He would stand by the living room window with a mug of coffee and say snow made the city feel honest for a few hours because everything ugly became temporarily hidden beneath white silence. I thought about him then, about the months after his funeral, about how quickly people changed once they believed grief had weakened me. Vanessa offering to help organize my finances. Daniel insisting I should simplify my estate planning because stress was dangerous at my age. The endless conversations whispered around me instead of directly to me. I had spent 41 years building a life with Harold Whitmore. We built our company together from a two-room office above a hardware store on the south side. I handled payroll while he handled clients. We survived recessions, lawsuits, bad investments, and 18-hour workdays when Daniel was still a little boy sleeping on folded coats in the office break room. Every dollar we earned came from sacrifice. Every account carried memories attached to it. And somehow, after Harold died, my own family began treating those accounts like abandoned property waiting to be claimed. The waiter returned one final time and placed the receipt beside me. "Thank you, ma'am." I signed quietly. Vanessa stared at the silver card. "What account is that connected to?" she asked. I placed the pen down carefully. "One that belongs only to me." Vanessa kept staring at the silver card as though it had personally insulted her. The confidence that had filled her voice earlier was gone now, replaced by something sharper and far more dangerous. Fear. Daniel loosened his tie again and glanced around the restaurant uneasily. A few nearby diners were still pretending not to watch us. The pianist continued playing softly near the bar, but even the music felt distant now. Lily reached for her glass of water with both hands. I noticed they were trembling slightly. "Mom," Daniel said carefully, "if something is wrong with the accounts, we should probably discuss it privately." Privately. That word almost made me smile. They had spent months discussing my finances privately. Quiet meetings. Closed office doors. Phone calls that stopped the moment I entered the room. Suddenly privacy mattered now that the balance of power had shifted. I folded my receipt neatly and placed it inside my handbag. "There is nothing wrong with my accounts," I said calmly. "They are finally exactly where they should be." Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "You froze every account without telling us." "The accounts attached to my name, yes. Daniel had access to those accounts for years. And now he does not." Her jaw tightened so hard I could almost hear her teeth press together. Daniel rubbed his forehead slowly. He looked exhausted suddenly. "Older than 42. Mom, we were helping you." I looked at my son quietly for several seconds before answering. I remembered him at 8 years old sitting beside Harold in our garage, pretending to fix bicycles with tiny plastic tools from a toy workbench. I remembered school science fairs, little league games, college applications spread across our kitchen table late at night. There was a time Daniel used to call me every Sunday just to ask how my week had been. That version of my son felt very far away now. "Helping me would have involved honesty," I said softly. Vanessa leaned forward immediately. "This is unbelievable. After everything we have done for you." I turned toward her. That is exactly what worried me. Silence settled over the table again. Heavy. Controlled. Lily stared down at her untouched dessert plate. Finally, she spoke quietly. "Mom, did you use Grandma Eleanor's card before tonight?" Vanessa snapped toward her daughter too quickly. "Excuse me." Lily shrank slightly in her seat, but continued carefully. "I am just asking because I saw some packages arrive at the house last month. Dad asked about them, and you said Grandma Eleanor approved everything." Vanessa laughed sharply. "Of course she approved it. We are family." Family. Another word people like to use when boundaries become inconvenient. I looked out the window again as snow continued falling across the river. Chicago winters could feel brutally cold, but there was honesty in winter too. Trees stopped pretending to bloom. The sky stopped pretending to be warm. Everything revealed itself eventually. "Do you know what the bank manager asked me yesterday?" I said quietly. Neither of them answered. She asked if I had personally authorized a transfer request for $70,000 into an investment account under Vanessa Whitmore Consulting. Daniel turned toward his wife immediately. Vanessa's face went completely still. Not angry, not embarrassed, just still. That frightened me more than shouting would have. "It was temporary," she said finally. I was moving money around for tax purposes. Without my signature? You forget things sometimes. There it was again. That same sentence. Soft, patient, poisonous. Daniel stared between us now like a man slowly realizing he had walked into a room full of smoke without noticing the fire. Vanessa, he whispered, but she was already standing, grabbing her purse too quickly from the chair beside her. I am not discussing this here. I remained seated, calm, tired, certain. You already did, I said quietly. Vanessa grabbed her coat from the back of the chair with stiff, jerky movements, but Daniel reached for her wrist before she could walk away. Wait, he said quietly. Just tell me the truth. The desperation in his voice surprised me more than anything else that night. For months he had sounded detached whenever finances came up, as though money itself exhausted him. But now something had finally pierced through the comfortable fog Vanessa had wrapped around him. She pulled her hand away immediately. Do not do this here. Did you move money without asking my mother? Daniel asked again. Vanessa looked around the restaurant, clearly aware people were beginning to notice the tension openly now. The waiter near the bar pretended to polish glasses while watching us carefully. A couple seated nearby stopped talking altogether. Public embarrassment had finally become inconvenient for her. Funny how that worked. I sat quietly and watched the snow continue drifting outside the tall windows. Harold used to tell me that character reveals itself fastest when money disappears, not when people gain it, when they lose access to it. Tonight, I finally understood exactly what he meant. Vanessa lowered her voice sharply. I handled investments because somebody had to. Your mother leaves stacks of paperwork everywhere. She forgets appointments. She almost signed the wrong tax forms last spring. Daniel slowly turned toward me. Is that true? I met his eyes calmly. No. Just one word. Steady. Simple. But I watched something shift inside my son at that moment. Doubt. Not toward me. Toward her. Vanessa noticed it too. Her entire posture tightened. Oh, so now I am the villain because I tried to help this family? Lily finally looked up from the table. Mom, Grandma Eleanor never forgets things. Vanessa stared at her daughter in disbelief. Excuse me. She remembers everybody's birthdays. She still sends handwritten cards every Christmas. She helped me study for my history finals because she remembered dates better than I did. Lily swallowed nervously before continuing. You always say she is confused, but she never seems confused to me. Silence spread across the table again, heavy and uncomfortable. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair like a man trying to wake himself from a bad dream. I could almost see him replaying months of conversations inside his head. Every warning Vanessa had whispered. Every financial discussion she insisted on managing herself. Every time she claimed I had approved something I never remembered approving. The frightening thing about manipulation is how ordinary it can sound while it is happening. Nobody notices the walls closing in until the windows disappear. Vanessa laughed suddenly, but there was no warmth left in it now. This is unbelievable. I spend years taking care of everybody, and suddenly I am some kind of criminal because Eleanor froze a few accounts. I opened my handbag again and removed a folded envelope. Thick cream paper. My attorney's handwriting across the front. I placed it carefully beside Daniel's plate. What is that? He asked quietly. Copies of transfer requests submitted over the last 6 months. Vanessa stopped breathing for just a second. I saw it happen. Tiny, quick, but real. There are 14 requests altogether, I continued softly. 7 contain signatures that are not mine. Daniel stared at the envelope without touching it. Lily looked pale now. Vanessa crossed her arms defensively. You had me helping with paperwork all year. Helping does not include imitation. Her face hardened instantly. Cold, controlled, calculating. For the first time all evening, I finally saw the performance disappear completely. This was the real Vanessa now. Not charming, not polished, just angry that the person she underestimated had stopped cooperating. You should be careful, Eleanor, she said quietly. People your age can become very paranoid. I smiled faintly at her across the candlelight. And people your age sometimes mistake kindness for weakness. Daniel stared at the envelope for a long time before finally reaching for it. His fingers moved slowly, almost reluctantly, like someone afraid the truth inside might permanently alter the shape of his life. Vanessa remained standing beside the table, arms crossed tightly against herself, but I noticed the confidence draining from her minute by minute. She had always relied on speed. Fast talking. Fast explanations. Fast emotional pressure before anyone had time to stop and think. Tonight the pace had changed, and she did not know how to control it anymore. Daniel opened the envelope carefully. Several printed documents slid onto the white tablecloth beneath the candlelight. Transfer requests, account summaries, authorization forms, each page marked with dates stretching back nearly 7 months. I watched his face as he flipped through them one by one. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something heavier settling behind his eyes. Recognition. These signatures, he whispered. They are not hers. Vanessa laughed again, but the sound came too quickly, too sharp. Of course they are hers. She signed everything at the house. Daniel looked up slowly. Mom signs her name with a fountain pen. Vanessa froze. He continued staring at the documents. These were signed with black felt marker. I said nothing. Sometimes silence reveals more than confrontation ever could. Lily leaned slightly toward her father, reading the pages beside him. I saw her eyes widen at one of the numbers listed near the bottom. $42,000 transferred into an account connected to Vanessa's consulting business 3 months earlier. Another $18,000 labeled as property management expenses. Then additional smaller withdrawals spread across multiple weeks like footprints trying not to leave a trail. Daniel rubbed both hands across his face. Vanessa, what is this? She finally sat down again, but not gracefully. Her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I already told you. I was managing investments. Without telling me, I was protecting us. That word landed strangely between them. Us. Not your mother. Not the family. Us. Daniel stared at her quietly now, and for the first time since Harold died, I saw my son thinking clearly instead of reacting emotionally. Vanessa noticed it too. Manipulation only works while confusion stays alive. Clarity is dangerous. Outside, the snowfall had grown heavier. Thick white flakes drifted against the dark river while headlights moved slowly through downtown traffic below. Chicago looked softer under snow. Quieter. But cold had a way of exposing structural weaknesses eventually. Roofs collapsed. Pipes burst. Hidden cracks spread wider once winter settled in fully. Families were not so different. Do you remember the afternoon you convinced me to sign those medical release forms? I asked quietly. Vanessa looked at me immediately. That was for emergency planning. No, I said calmly. It was for legal competency evaluation paperwork. Daniel lifted his head sharply. What? I reached into my handbag once more and removed another folded document. This one thinner, simpler, more dangerous. I slid it across the table toward him. The bank manager printed a copy for me yesterday. Daniel unfolded the paper slowly. His expression changed almost instantly. Complete shock this time. No confusion left. At the top of the form, directly beneath Vanessa's signature, were the words request for financial conservatorship consultation. Lily covered her mouth quietly. Vanessa stood again, so quickly her chair nearly tipped backward. That was precautionary paperwork. Daniel rose slowly from his seat. You were trying to have my mother declared mentally unfit. Several nearby diners openly stared now. Vanessa lowered her voice urgently. Do not make this sound worse than it is. Worse. I almost smiled at the choice of words. Not false. Not untrue. Just worse. Daniel looked down at the documents again before finally asking the question that mattered most. How long were you planning this? Vanessa's face hardened completely then. No performance left. No charm. Only irritation that the game had ended before she finished winning. Longer than your mother realizes, she said coldly. The words settled over the table like ice water. Even the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade for a moment. Daniel remained standing beside his chair, staring at his wife as though he no longer recognized the woman in front of him. Vanessa did not look ashamed anymore. That was the strangest part. Cornered, yes. Angry, certainly, but not ashamed. She smoothed the front of her cream-colored dress slowly and lifted her chin with the calm confidence of someone who still believed she could regain control if she kept talking long enough. You are acting like I stole from some helpless stranger, she said quietly. I have spent 15 years holding this family together while Eleanor sat in that giant house pretending everything still worked the way it did in 1998. Daniel looked stunned. What are you talking about? Vanessa laughed softly, but there was bitterness underneath it now. Your father dies, and suddenly everything becomes sacred. Every account, every piece of furniture, every stupid tradition. Meanwhile, I am the one balancing school schedules, taxes, property maintenance, insurance renewals, and your mother's endless paperwork because nobody else wants to deal with it. I listened quietly. People often reveal their true motivations only after they stop pretending to be kind. Lily sat frozen beside us, her eyes glossy with confusion and embarrassment. My heart ached for her more than anyone else at that table. Children always pay the emotional bill for the wars adults create. Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his chair. That still does not explain forged signatures. Vanessa exhaled sharply through her nose. Do you know how many times your mother forgot to pay something this year? None, I answered calmly. I have copies of every payment confirmation. Vanessa ignored me completely. She should not even be managing this kind of money alone anymore. There it was. The real argument. Not concern. Control. I remembered the afternoon 2 months earlier when Vanessa stood inside my kitchen holding a mug of herbal tea while casually discussing retirement communities. Some of them are beautiful now, she had said sweetly. Like luxury resorts for seniors. At the time, I almost believed she cared. Looking back, I realized she had already been measuring the dimensions of my future absence. Daniel stared down at the conservatorship paperwork again. You never talked to me about any of this. Vanessa crossed her arms. Because you never want conflict. Somebody has to make difficult decisions. Difficult decisions? Lily whispered suddenly. All three of us looked at her. Her voice trembled slightly. You told Dad Grandma Eleanor wanted help. You said she was overwhelmed. Vanessa softened her expression immediately when turning toward her daughter. It happened so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Sweetheart, adults handle complicated situations sometimes. Lily shook her head slowly. You lied. The simplicity of those 2 words hit harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, another voice interrupted from behind us. Mrs. Whitmore? We turned together. Margaret Hayes stood beside the table in a dark wool coat dusted lightly with snowflakes. Harold's attorney for nearly 20 years. Mine now. Calm gray eyes. Leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. Vanessa went completely pale the moment she saw her. Margaret nodded politely toward me first. I apologize for arriving late. Parking downtown is terrible tonight. Then she looked directly at Daniel. Your mother asked me to bring additional documents in case clarification became necessary. The word clarification carried enough quiet authority to silence the entire table instantly. Margaret placed the leather portfolio gently beside me, including copies of surveillance footage from First National Bank showing who attempted to access Mrs. Whitmore's safe deposit box last Thursday afternoon. Daniel turned slowly toward his wife again. Vanessa did not move. For the first time all evening, she looked genuinely afraid. Vanessa's hand tightened around the strap of her purse so hard her knuckles turned white beneath the restaurant lights. Margaret Hayes remained perfectly calm beside the table, removing several neatly organized folders from her leather portfolio with the same composed precision she had used for decades inside courtrooms and law offices across Chicago. Harold used to admire that about her. Margaret could walk through a hurricane without wrinkling her coat, he once told me. Tonight she looked exactly the same. Unshaken, prepared, dangerous in the quietest possible way. Daniel stared at the folders as though they might explode if touched. Safe deposit box? He repeated slowly. Margaret nodded once. Last Thursday at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon. Vanessa immediately lifted her chin defensively. Eleanor asked me to retrieve family documents. Margaret opened one of the folders carefully. According to the bank manager, Mrs. Whitmore specifically instructed the bank 3 months ago that no one except herself was permitted access to that box. Daniel looked at me sharply. I nodded calmly. After someone attempted to request duplicate keys in April. Vanessa laughed suddenly, but the sound cracked in the middle. This is ridiculous. You are turning ordinary family misunderstandings into some kind of criminal investigation. Margaret folded her hands neatly over the closed folder. Attempting to access restricted financial property while preparing conservatorship paperwork tends to create concern. Lily slowly pushed her untouched dessert away from herself. Her face looked pale beneath the restaurant lighting now. I hated that she was witnessing this. But perhaps truth always arrives unpleasantly when families spend too long building themselves on performance instead of honesty. Daniel rubbed both hands over his face again before finally asking the question he had clearly been avoiding all evening. Vanessa, What exactly were you trying to do? She turned toward him immediately, her expression softening again with practiced speed. I was trying to protect our future by freezing my mother out of her own accounts, by preparing for reality. Daniel stared at her blankly. Vanessa exhaled sharply and lowered her voice. Your mother is 68 years old and living alone in a 7-bedroom house filled with paperwork she barely understands anymore. Somebody needed to step in before things collapsed. I looked at her quietly. Nothing collapsed until you arrived. Her eyes flashed instantly. Anger. Real anger now. Not polished irritation. Not wounded innocence. Something much colder underneath. You have spent your entire life acting like this family revolves around you, she snapped softly. Harold dies, and suddenly everyone has to preserve your feelings while you sit on millions of dollars pretending you are still the center of everything. Daniel looked physically sick now. He sank back into his chair slowly, staring at the woman beside him as though seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Margaret opened another folder and slid several printed photographs across the table. Grainy security stills from the bank lobby. Vanessa standing beside the customer service desk wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a stack of documents against her chest. The timestamp glowed clearly in the corner of each image. Lily covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Vanessa glanced at the photographs only briefly before looking away. That told me enough. Innocent people study evidence carefully. Guilty people avoid eye contact with it altogether. I never wanted this to happen publicly, I said quietly. Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. Please. You planned this entire dinner. No, I answered calmly. You did. Silence settled over the table again. The pianist near the bar transitioned into a slower song, while snow continued falling heavily outside the windows. For a strange moment, everything around us felt almost peaceful despite the wreckage unfolding at the center of the table. Margaret closed the final folder carefully before looking toward Daniel. There is one more thing your mother deserves to tell you herself. Daniel lifted tired eyes toward me. I held his gaze steadily for several seconds before speaking. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa contacted a real estate broker about listing my home before I had even agreed to move anywhere. Daniel stared at me as though he had misheard the words entirely. You were saying she tried to sell the house? His voice sounded hollow now. Exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles into people when reality begins tearing through years of comfortable denial. I nodded once. Without my permission. Vanessa immediately shook her head. That is not what happened. Margaret calmly removed another document from her folder. The broker agreement was drafted but never finalized because Mrs. Whitmore personally contacted the agency before any listing became active. Vanessa turned toward Margaret sharply. You had no right involving yourself in private family matters. Margaret did not react at all. Protecting my client's legal interests is literally my profession. Daniel leaned back in his chair slowly and stared up at the ceiling for several seconds. I could almost see memories rearranging themselves behind his eyes now. Every conversation, every rushed signature, every time Vanessa insisted something had already been discussed with me when it had not. Manipulation rarely collapses all at once. It falls apart piece by piece until suddenly the entire structure looks rotten. Lily wiped quietly beneath one eye before looking toward me. Grandma Eleanor, were you really going to lose the house? Her voice sounded heartbreakingly small. I reached across the table and rested my hand gently over hers. Not anymore. Vanessa laughed bitterly under her breath. You are all acting like I planned some grand conspiracy. Daniel finally looked at her again. Did you? She opened her mouth immediately, but no answer came out this time. That silence told him more than any confession could have. Outside, snow continued covering the sidewalks along the river, while the city lights reflected softly across the dark water below. Bellamy's had started emptying out around us now. A few late diners remained near the bar, but most of the restaurant had fallen quiet. The waitstaff moved carefully through the room, pretending not to notice our table anymore. Chicago understood discretion. Wealthy families fell apart quietly here all the time. I looked down at my folded napkin and remembered another winter nearly 30 years earlier. Harold and I sitting at our kitchen table balancing invoices, while Daniel slept upstairs after his first semester at Northwestern. We had barely enough money to cover payroll that month. Harold looked exhausted, rubbing his eyes while snow piled against the windows outside. Then he reached across the table, squeezed my hand gently, and said, Everything we build only matters if we protect each other while building it. Back then I thought protection meant working hard. Sacrifice. Loyalty. I never imagined one day I would need protection from people sitting inside my own family. Daniel suddenly pushed his chair back from the table and stood again. This time more slowly. More deliberately. Vanessa looked up at him nervously. Daniel, did you ever love my mother? The question landed softly between them, but it carried enough pain to make my chest tighten. Vanessa blinked in disbelief. What kind of question is that? A serious one. She folded her arms tightly again. Of course I did. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, I think you tolerated her because she had things you wanted access to. Vanessa's face hardened instantly. That is not fair. Neither is trying to have someone declared mentally incompetent so you can control their finances. Lily lowered her head quietly. I watched my granddaughter carefully. The innocence of children does not disappear all at once. It fades slowly the first time they realize adults lie more than they admit. Vanessa suddenly grabbed her purse from the chair beside her. I am done sitting here being attacked. Margaret closed her portfolio calmly. Before you leave, Mrs. Whitmore, there is one final matter. Vanessa froze immediately. Margaret slid a single sealed envelope across the table toward her. Official notice from First National Bank regarding the internal fraud investigation opened this afternoon. Vanessa stared at the sealed envelope as though touching it might make everything inside suddenly real. Her fingers hovered above the table for several seconds before finally pulling back again. For the first time since this dinner began, she looked completely uncertain. Not angry, not defensive, just uncertain. Margaret remained standing calmly beside me with one gloved hand resting lightly against her portfolio. Snowflakes melted slowly along the shoulders of her dark wool coat. Daniel looked between the envelope and his wife with hollow disbelief settling deeper across his face every minute. Fraud investigation? He asked quietly. Margaret nodded once. The bank flagged multiple irregular transfer attempts connected to Mrs. Whitmore's accounts. Because several requests involved forged signatures and restricted access violations, the matter was automatically escalated this afternoon. Vanessa swallowed hard. I noticed the movement immediately. Small signs reveal the truth faster than words ever do. Lily sat perfectly still now, both hands folded tightly in her lap beneath the table. She looked younger tonight somehow, like childhood itself had suddenly become too heavy to carry comfortably anymore. Vanessa finally forced herself to speak. This is insane. You are all overreacting to paperwork mistakes. Margaret's expression never changed. Forgery is not considered a paperwork mistake under Illinois law. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I could see exhaustion pulling at every line in his face now. Not just from tonight. From years perhaps. Years spent balancing between loyalty, avoidance, and whatever version of reality Vanessa carefully constructed around him one conversation at a time. Did you really think Mom would never notice? He asked softly. Vanessa turned toward him sharply. Your mother notices everything. That is exactly the problem. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I saw it happen immediately after the words left her mouth. Regret flickered across her face for half a second before disappearing again behind frustration. But it was too late. Daniel heard it clearly. So did Lily. I looked down at the untouched coffee beside my plate. Cold now. Harold used to tease me about that. You always forget the coffee once you start thinking too hard, he would say with a smile. Funny the things grief preserves. Not dramatic moments. Tiny ones. The sound of newspaper pages turning at 6 in the morning. A coat hanging near the door. The smell of coffee growing cold while conversations drift through a quiet kitchen. Vanessa finally grabbed the envelope from the table and tore it open too quickly. Several pages slid partly out as she scanned the first paragraph. Her face drained of color almost instantly. Daniel noticed it too. What does it say? She did not answer. Margaret answered for her. Temporary suspension of all account access pending internal review. Requests for additional documentation may follow. Vanessa looked up sharply. You coordinated this. No, Margaret said calmly. Mrs. Whitmore protected herself. That sentence settled quietly over the table. Protected herself. Such a simple concept. Yet somehow women my age are often expected to apologize the moment we finally do it. Vanessa stood frozen beside her chair, clutching the papers tightly, while snow continued falling outside the restaurant windows. Bellamy's had nearly emptied completely now. Staff members moved quietly through the dining room, resetting tables for tomorrow, as if trying not to disturb the ruins of ours. Daniel slowly reached for the conservatorship document again. He stared at Vanessa's signature near the bottom for several silent seconds before speaking. You were really going to take control of everything. Vanessa's voice cracked slightly this time. I was trying to secure our future by erasing my mother from hers. She looked away immediately. That was answer enough. Lily suddenly stood from her chair without a word. She walked around the table slowly and stopped beside me. Then, very gently, she rested her hand against my shoulder. Such a small gesture. But after months of being treated like an obstacle inside my own family, that quiet moment nearly broke my heart. Daniel watched his daughter standing beside me instead of beside her mother, and something inside him finally seemed to collapse completely. He looked at Vanessa with grief instead of confusion now. Real grief. The kind people feel when they realize the person they trusted most has been speaking an entirely different language behind every smile.